Hello, everybody. Christy Giannoni in week 4 as we prep for the comprehensive exam. This week, we're taking a look at General Public Administration, or GPA. It's a lot of information, so I'll go ahead and jump right into it. So we were to identify one government agency and one private sector agency that both have similar missions. So I'll be focusing on education with a public high school and a private high school, whose mission is to offer these educational services for grades 9 through 12. And then we're going to be looking at Graham Allison, who asks, are they alike in all unimportant aspects? And develop a thesis to respond to that question. So this is the thesis that I have chosen. I am kind of aligning and agreeing with what he's saying. So public and private, they do share many similar functions that we engage in to meet these similar missions. But it's how we engage in these functions that separate us, and kind of exploring what that impact is. So we are also to identify 3 themes that would defend this point of view. So as we know, GPA focuses on the role of government, the larger role of how government is doing this, and organizational focus, how these governments are related. So I'll be taking a look at structure, politics, and service. So taking a look at structure, all of my themes will kind of be broken down into sub-themes. So this first one of hierarchy, Weber focused on structure and Taylor focused on process, but both wanted the one best way. So there's, both private and public are looking for efficiencies, how to structure things in a way that's going to get them to what they need. I think that private has a lot more flexibility in structure. This can be included in hiring, the Pendleton Act, civil service. These are things that the public agencies have to follow. So you're not able to just hire somebody off of the street. Most private agencies have processes as well, but not confined to red tape like a public agency would be. And there's a lot more recruiting challenges, especially right now with the workforce. There's more flexibility in benefits and salary, according to Allison, that the private school would be able to offer versus what a public agency would do, since they're funded by taxpayer dollars. Looking at goals, the goals would be kind of aligned with the structure within both of these agencies. So public agencies have what we call soft goals and objectives, and they're softer because we are dealing with qualitative output and outcomes like quality of life, and that measurement is going to be much different than private businesses. When we're taking a look at how these agencies are developing their goals and missions, we're going to be also looking at the public agencies to be aligning with things like constitutional rights, what people are needing to have and obligated to have that the government should be providing, and then voter obligations. I think that Leonard White touched on the responsibility and what the public agencies should be doing in regards to what people voted on, what they're saying is important to them by utilizing their voting rights. And then as we look at operations as kind of a sub-theme of structure, again, Taylor was looking for those efficiencies. Rosenblum talked about how government agencies and then administrators who work for them have this obligation to promote an impersonal view of individual neutrality in teaching. So in this comparison, where the public school is going to need that neutrality as government workers if they're funded by it, and then you have private schools who can have a religious-based teaching. All right, and then taking a look at politics, kind of broke this up into decision-making, funding, and adapting. So in decision-making, Alice Rivlin talks about the decentralization and community control. This can be modeled by the voucher system. So we kind of learned about this voucher system that blurs the line between government control and bureaucratic structures. And then taking a look at how ethics can tie into this. How do ethics and positive rights, or people being entitled to getting the help if they need it and they can't get it themselves, play into this? I also thought of Aristotle and virtue theory. So as public administrators, if we're doing things with tact, with ethics, is that going to be exactly aligned in both public and private agencies? And then with Ritter and Weber, are public agencies more obligated to look at wicked problems? Someone I forgot to list on the slide, but that I just thought of is good now, and the distinct functions of government and what moving forward looks like with the relationship between politics and administration, and how that can impact how a public and private agency can operate. Funding is going to be a big one. This is going to be where we're seeing it's different and it's important and unimportant. There are socioeconomic factors to be analyzed that could in turn affect how policies are made and how funding is distributed. And that's kind of what Kingdon was talking about. There does have to be that crisis element, but it can make a big impact, especially as we're seeing with a crisis like the pandemic that we're experiencing. I think cooperative federalism and unfunded mandates is something that can be impacted. Private agencies, private schooling could have more funds if they can get benefactors, donations. They're getting tuition for their school to be able to adjust versus a public agency that's dependent on limited funding to meet these unfunded mandates. And then for a public school, there's going to be legal ways that money can be spent. This Anti-Deficiency Act said the government can only spend money in areas that have been appropriated. So that can cause challenges and big differences there. And then, these private schools, they have fiduciary responsibilities to the benefactors to maximize their return or investment, say if they're paying tuition. But for the public, they're obligated to correctly spend that tax money. And that's kind of what Allison was talking about there. I think market efficiencies is something that can be tied into as well for economics and kind of tying into Constitution. What level of government control do we want in education and how that would impact if someone's going to send someone to a private or public school? And then taking a look at the ability to adapt. So in responding to a crisis, like Kingdon said, again, private has more flexibility. They can use funding for different ways, trying new and creative ideas to be able to adjust accordingly. And that can impact a child's education, which could then have negative or positive externalities in the future. And like Merton talked about, the strict devotion to rules can really hinder efficiency in the public sector, slower to adapt, and what impact does that make? All right, last theme that I want to take a look at is service. I think this is different and the most important. Broke it down by essential services and accountability. So for essential services, we could look at Appleby. Government is required to sacrifice efficiency for fairness and equality. That is the obligation. That is what we are here to do. And they're also responsible for figuring out the most efficient utilization of resources at their disposal, and that's white. So when we talk about this equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, we're talking about not only the services provided, but how they can get people to get the same education. So that can impact the economy in a lot of different ways. And then accountability, again, I really like to tie Leonard White in here for the efficient use of resources, and Graham Allison himself talking about the public process being subjected to more scrutiny, and how does that impact change. We're really, public agencies, public schools, transparency is a huge thing. And this is an essential cornerstone of democratic governments in general. And this kind of ties into Weber and his way of talking about the reaches and limits of modern bureaucratic accountability in general. So how these structures, these bureaus are going to be able to provide the service in a way that's going to be beneficial to the community. All right, so why does this matter? Kind of wrapping it up, I think this example illustrates the importance of the wider scope and impact of these differences. The more education an individual receives, the greater the social benefit, as more educated populations tend to provide greater economic value to the community, etc. So government intervention in the production of education can allow for a social benefit to future generations, but not all education is created equal, as we could see in the contrast and comparison of public and private high schools. All right, I went to Grad Fest. I'm getting excited. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your feedback.